In this video, I'm going to give you a really useful tool to turn all the things you've seen and heard in a session into a family therapy case formulation. No one taught me to do this properly in grad school, and I don't think it's just me, because when I speak to other clinicians and sometimes the therapists I supervise, they seem to struggle to put together a conceptualization of what's going on in a family. And as a structural family therapist, as I listen, I notice theoretical lenses get more blurry, and inevitably attachment theory is mentioned or someone's neurodiversity. And suddenly we're not being very systemic anymore. And it can be a real problem when we mix modalities in family work. When that happens, we just don't get the clarity or direction we really need to help a family, especially when we start applying individual treatment modalities like attachment styles and medical terminology to a family, and still somehow try and make it fit with the systemic lens. It sounds exhausting and confusing, and it's not evidence-based, right? We don't know that that works. So I'm going to give you a very nifty systemic method to stay on track. It's one I use quite often, and it's 3 columns on 1 page, and it takes about 15 or 20 minutes of your time. It's a working tool that pulls together structural and functional systems, which, yes, are very different modalities, but they are all systemic family approaches, and that is why I'm giving myself a pass. Before we go on, if we've not met before, my name is Oliver, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist here in Los Angeles, and I make videos that turn family systems theory into things that you can use in a session tomorrow. Now, I've just launched a free family systems community, and this video is a direct response to one of the members, Rachel, hi Rachel, who wanted to know about family therapy case formulation. So I want to take this opportunity to ask you all to join. It's totally free. Click on the link below and come say hi. The framework I'm going to teach you takes all of the complex information you hear in a session about presenting problems, the history, the triggers, who's involved, what keeps it going, and it lays it out on a single page in 3 different columns. So this is all about getting your own thinking clear so that you can act and create a treatment plan. If you're new to family systems, I'm going to back up for a minute and remind you that systemic therapy believes that the symptom the family wants your help with lives in the relationships between people, not in any one individual. Now, the individual who has the problem is called the identified patient. It just means that they're the one person who happens to carry the symptoms on behalf of everyone else in the family. Structural family therapists are less interested in asking, why does this person have the symptom? We're more interested in how is the family's way of interacting keeping this symptom alive. The family is going to tell you a very linear cause and effect explanation of the symptom. He won't go to school because he is anxious. She won't do as she's told because she's oppositional. And we fall into this trap too when we say things like, well, the kid won't go to school because of their anxious attachment style and neurodiversity. And we absolutely need to know about all of these things, but we're doing family therapy, and family systems therapy is more interested in looking for circular explanations in addition to linear ones. Circular explanations make a loop, right? The family organizes around the problem in a certain way, which reinforces the problem, and that problem keeps the family organized in that way. The linear elements need to be understood, right? Things like predisposing factors, history, temperament, cognitive factors like beliefs and what the family thinks about the problem, but they are not the main driver in systemic work. But we're going to collect these anyway because they do actually mark where the family's resistance is going to show up later. If you know that the family believes that she's always been difficult, you know that they'll resist seeing her behavior as a response to other things going on in the family. I've got a lot more to say about that later, but for now, let's go back to how to make a family case formulation, which is another word for a hypothesis. It's a systemic guess of what goes on around the problem. I say that because I don't want to confuse this with a case summary, which is a list of things. The difference is that one is a beautifully detailed write-up that describes everything, but doesn't predict anything. A hypothesis, though, or a formulation, is something that we're willing to be wrong about, but if we're right, it should be predicting what happens and why. Here's the framework, and I'm going to explain this twice. When it's completed, you read the map from left to right, but you actually start filling it in with the column on the right, the behavioral loop. This column on the right here is the only one you can see with your own eyes in the room. It's where you spend most, if not all, of a session gathering the information on. And I've actually had to spend 2 or 3 sessions occasionally on this part. So don't pressure yourself to get it all down in the first session. The family's going to come in with a very specific problem, which you will have to define. Usually this is going to be a behavioral problem. So don't accept we want to work on communication. That's not a behavior. So I would immediately ask something like, what happens when there's bad communication? And the family might then say, oh, well, then we all start fighting. Fighting is the problem. The fighting, or whatever the problem you agree on, is held in a repetitive sequence of interactions around a person, not in one person. And a fight is actually a great example because it literally requires 2 or more people. We're going to assume that everyone in the family plays a part in the problem no matter what it is. And the coordinated dance between everyone leads up to the problem will usually relieve some form of tension for a moment. And that relief is exactly what reinforces the loop and keeps it going on. So this whole cycle, this whole behavioral loop is the symptoms engine. It's what drives it. So the column on the right here isn't the problem behavior. It's the whole loop. It's the whole pattern dance around which the behavior lives inside. There's a trigger, a response, often an attempted solution. There's always going to be a little bit of relief, and then a reset, and then it all starts all over again. The trigger is what happens, what's the event that kicks everything off. Then I want to know how the identified patient is treated while the symptom is showing. Who does what and when, then what? Where's dad when that happens? Where's mom when that happens? How members try to deal with it. That's the attempted solution. Maybe the row escalates, somebody gets louder, somebody slams the door, somebody runs away. Then I want to know the outcome of those solutions. Then we've got to figure out the system's response to that outcome, how the time is spent until the next trigger or the reset. Everyone calms down until the next time. To get this information, we're going to use both direct questions, what did you do next, and circular ones. When mom said this, what did dad do? Asking enough of these helps you trace the sequence around the room, around all people in the family until you get the loop clear. And if you want some of my circular questions, you can find them in the classroom on my school community. I think the classroom is called Downloads or PDFs and Freebies. It's in the Family Systems Collective on School, and the link is below. Okay, so my top tip here is that clients are going to give you adjectives. She's difficult, he's checked out, they're anxious. That is content, which is not helpful to find a sequence. Push back on answers like that to get a behavior. I sometimes say, what would I see on camera? What behaviors could I film? Or more simply, who did what, to whom, and what happened next? You can't do much to interrupt a list of adjectives, but a cycle that is described with actions can totally be broken. The really practical part of this column is that anyone who shows up in the sequence, either as the trigger or someone who responds or provides relief, belongs in the assessment and probably needs to be in the room. Now, that's not always possible, but if the cycle involves them, then we've got to try and at least push for them to be there or talk about why they can't be there. And ideally, we try and get them in the room. The best way to learn this framework, though, is to see it in action with a case study. And you can watch a separate video where I do this. It's an exclusive video for members of the Family Systems Collective. Again, it's totally free to join, and it's under the case study classroom on my school community. The link is below. The next column we fill in is actually the first column. This is the historical data we need. It's linear explanation, real historical events, and maybe systemic therapists might want to stay away from these because they're not really about interactions and relationships. Historical data and linear thinking like this tends to lead us right into you're a terrible child and you need to go to residential. You are the problem. So we're kind of averse to this kind of data. But having said that, though, these factors are still really useful to know, but only if we remember that they don't explain the problem systemically. When you find the data in the context of this framework, the information here helps us understand why the person is in their part of the loop and why it might be hard for them to give it up. And that framing can turn history into an act of understanding, which is exactly the sort of tone we need to be taking with a family. These historical factors, I think you can lump into 5 broad categories. There's probably more if I think about it, but I think the obvious one is history. Obviously, it's the most important one. This covers recent stressful events. In Bowen family systems, we call these nodal events: losses, job changes, bereavement, financial strain, an older sibling moving out to college, stages of family life kind of thing. It's part of creating a timeline that I think is really important to see so that we can understand what stresses have been added into a family recently. The next one is system, and this is part of the family system who are outside of whoever lives under the roof. So that could be grandparents, the school, the vicar, could be an old therapist. Temperament is sometimes useful to understand, especially if you've got like a difficult to soothe child or a parent who had issues growing up around conflict. Introverted versus extroverted character traits. Body is more of the somatic or physical issues, chronic illness, disability, pain, fatigue. And sometimes biology is in the mix too, learning disabilities, psychosis, ADHD, neurodivergency, things like that. We're not going to label any of these as being the cause, but just a factor that explains why people are stuck sometimes. The one that I always forget is system. Parents are going to be so focused on their kid, they won't even think to tell us that their job is impossible or the fact that they drive 2 hours to get to work every day. How you build this column is by taking a brief developmental history for each member. I probably would do this separately with the parents, separately with the kids. Sometimes just over the phone is fine between sessions. You could do it in a family therapy session, but it would be taking away from family therapy, and I tend to find that a bit distracting. It's also helpful if you section this column out and have a row or a part for each person in the family. And this is going to become a bit clearer later on when we put it all together. The next column is beliefs, and we can have a lot of beliefs about relationships handed down as family scripts, like I'm not lovable, I'm a failure, conflict is bad. If we disagree, it means that something's wrong. I call those belief systems about self and other relationships, and those are really important to understand because they might help us contextualize a parent's approach to parenting or communication. But we can also have beliefs around the way that we read events. We tend to be prone to misinterpret things based on our own belief systems. So giving praise to a sibling might be misinterpreted as favoritism when it was just praise. So essentially we're talking cognitive distortions, biases, defenses, all of the things that come up that are unique to individuals in the room. They all protect something and they kind of restrain us in some way. To find these out, there's a useful little acronym you might want to remember to surface all of these beliefs in a few minutes. B is for belief. What is your understanding of why this is happening? Why do you believe this is happening? L is for link. L is for link. Right before your kid acts out, what goes through your mind just before you do what you normally do? What is the link between your thoughts and your behaviors? Help me understand why you do what you do. O is for origin. Where did you first learn that? Where did you first experience that? C is for cost. What does holding this belief protect you from having to face? What is it protecting you from? And K is for key. What would need to shift even slightly for it to feel less true? These beliefs aren't always irrational, but they usually are always protecting something, which is what makes them hard to shift. So this is a really clinically useful column. It explains perhaps why interventions in the past don't work, because you can't really change a behavior without touching the belief underneath it. It also supplies material for positive connotations and reframes or paradoxical interventions. Tells you whether you can give a homework and expect the family to do it, or whether you need to be a bit sideways and be more paradoxical or give them less head-on homeworks. It's going to tell you how the beliefs that are running the family's rules and behaviors are going to influence your approach and your interventions. And again, it's helpful if you section off this column and have a row or a part for each person in the family. And I highly suggest the next video you watch is the walkthrough of a case using this framework. It will make it all become much more tangible. The video, again, is in the school community. The link's below. Once you've filled in all 3 columns, the understanding and formulation comes from reading the page from left to right. And sometimes it's helpful to do one person at a time so that you get a linear story of why the individual behaves the way that they do. The historical data on the left create a belief in the middle, and that belief produces a reason or perhaps explains why they move in the way they do in the behavioral loop. So a parent who grows up in a high conflict family believes that conflict means the family is falling apart, and it explains why they avoid conflict or setting consequences for their oppositional kid. I think it's this way around on the camera, right? When you do this for each person in the cycle, every row becomes this sort of short, compassionate explanation of why that person is involved in the loop and why it feels necessary for them. It stops you seeing anyone as being difficult or unwilling because you can trace each part back and roll it back into something that makes more sense in the past. When you read across the page and then down the final column, you get to see why each person's behavior becomes the next person's trigger. Who responds to what that next person do until the loop closes. Nobody is causing anything on their own. They're all sort of interlocking systems here. I think I get the most insight when I'm looking at the big picture and zooming out, when I'm thinking about what the right column tells me about what happens, and then the left and middle column tells us why it happens and potentially why it can't stop. And I guess the whole point, the behaviors on the right are locked in place by the histories and beliefs. And I guess that is the whole point of this model. The circular loop around the problem that we want to identify first is frozen in place by individual beliefs and thoughts. And when you put them all together, you get this really complicated formulation. And it isn't just a description of what happens, it's a movie, it's live, it's a pattern of interactions with backstory and, I don't know, character development. The really juicy thing is that this whole worksheet more or less tells you what you need to do. The right column tells you who needs to be in the room, and the left and middle columns tells you where you need to target. It tells you what beliefs you might have to challenge. But overall, remember that you can break the chain at any one part. If you can't work with the kid to get them to change their attitude about getting angry to mum, then you can work with mum who has difficulty setting limits, because we know why she has difficulty setting limits. So the finished formulation gives you understanding and a plan all at the same time. You can see the loop, see what holds it up, and see the 1 or 2 points where it's going to be really effective to push at and try and make change for the family. All right, Rachel, this one was for you. I hope it helps. Let me know in the comments if it doesn't. And I'll see you in the next one.